Bob, last year in BC, we had a relatively benign year, shall we say, with the exception of the Jasper fire and some fires in the Northeast. It became a pretty remote situation compared to the previous year. Without demanding too much crystal ball gazing, what do you see in 2025?
Well, we've had an awfully mild winter. The snowpack data is in places it's way below normal. A couple places it's a little bit above. Snowpacks no longer really are any indicator to the kind of fire season we have. Things can also change on a dime where we've had years like 2017, 2018, we saw normal snowpacks across the province and it flipped a switch. And in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, it had dried out completely and we were off to the races. 2021, it was the heat dome, which switched things quite quickly. It's the weather that we get in late spring that really tells us what's going to happen. We did have a mild year last year, though I still think that we had 700,000 hectares burned. Once again, it was mostly in the north. Um, but we also had pretty mild years in 2019 and 2020, and then we had 2021 and 2023. So it's important to not get complacent and think that, that pattern of a mild year is going to persist because we know that from the modeling that we've seen, and the modeling is getting pretty accurate in its predictive abilities, that even years like 2023, are going to become more the norm than the exception within a decade, unfortunately.
The high
Years,
intensity fire years will become more the norm than the exception.
correct.
Bob, if I'm an executive director, sitting in the say an like you were referring to Kamloops, what kinds of signs would I be looking for in the spring that might ramp up my awareness and preparation for a response to a fire event?
Yeah. So, um, and this is the difficult part is that our ability to predict what's going to happen is gotten worse with these extreme events that we're having. But coming into the spring, long periods of dry, high pressure systems. When we do prescribed burning in the spring, especially, we're looking for that pattern of a week out, we see this high pressure system building. As it gets closer every day, if it stays intact, then that's quite telling. Oftentimes, you'll see something. You're making plans for a trip or something, and you see, well, there's a high pressure system forecasted, 7 or 8 days out, and then the next day, all of a sudden, it's sort of disappeared, or it's shrunk from 7 days down to two or something. If we see that high pressure system set up and anchor itself in, and then it holds and holds, and it might shrink by a day or something, but it continues to hold, there's a bit of a pattern to that. And so when it comes to prescribed burning, we look for that and go, okay, this is great. We can actually plan a couple days in advance versus trying to jump on something at the last minute. Other years, the pattern is, you'll see, a couple clear days or a small high pressure system, and it's only 2 days long. Well, you have winds on the front end and you have winds on the back end. So you really don't have that kind of calm thing in the middle. If you have a week of sunny and dry, you get calm in the middle. So, and there's a bit of a pattern there as much as we can detect patterns anymore. So if we do see that, and if we see that happen in March, and if we see it happen again in April, and it happens again in May, then there's a chance that that pattern's going to hold. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to chew my head off for that or something because it's not embedded in science. But prescribed burning that we do is it's art and science. So we sort of look for these trends and these patterns. If all we see are, a 2 day high pressure system followed by rain and another one a week later or something, then that pattern can hold as well. And we get these sort of, it dries out in June, we get a few ignitions, and then it gets wet and it sort of puts it out. We don't get these big bad fire seasons. But if we do see that pattern of setting up, and then setting up, and if we see that pattern We get to July and August, those periods of long dry tend to get bigger. So, so that's as much as we can predict
Well,
things.
that's very helpful. So let me see if I have it right. So if I'm the ED that I've talked about in Kamloops, I'm going to be looking for protracted highs
Yes.
starting in the spring,
Yes.
lasting not a couple of days or even 3 days, but 5, 6, 7 days.
Correct.
And if they start repeating themselves in the spring, chances are they're going to get longer in the summer, and then you start really hitting risk.
And then it's just the ignitions. Yeah. Yeah. We're all set up. We're ready to go. And then it's just a probability of ignitions. And the longer you have these hot, dry, windy conditions, the greater the likelihood you're going to get ignitions coupled with it.
Let's stay with the executive director or the program manager, because they are the audience for this, Bob. What do they need to know? I mean, some of them have had evacuation experience now, so that's top of mind. And maybe we should address that. They need to know about how organizations can be a part of that and help. What would you say, first of all, about evacuations? What do we know?
We know that they're extremely traumatic for people. They're more costly than we think they are. I mean, we dole out, a couple checks through the Red Cross, but protracted evacuations for people can wipe them out. We did some analysis a couple of years ago in Cranbrook, and we were looking at the census for sort of the income distribution, income demographics for Cranbrook. And a 3-day evacuation would wipe out, basically an annual income for a certain percentage of the population. Low income people, what it costs to do evacuation, whether it's to a evacuation center or to friends and family or to a hotel. Those are the three options, really, when you do analysis. And just a 3-day evacuation, and no evacuation is only 3 days, but we just looked at 3 days. And that's enough to basically wipe out the annual, after tax income for a certain percentage of the population. And so, in a lot of rural communities, there's a lot of people who are in that middle to lower tier of economic assets. And so evacuations are extremely financially and emotionally traumatic. And that's without losing the home. It's expensive to move people. No one ever wants to hit that go button and get caught flat-footed, but you also don't want to miss hitting the go button because then you're leading to potentially very dangerous situations. So a lot of evacuations, unfortunately, occur at night, which we're seeing. I haven't seen any statistics on it, but that seems to be a trend that we're
Yes,
seeing,
yeah.
which is it increases the fear and anxiety and the trauma associated with it. And we don't ever want to get in a position where we didn't give people enough time and then we trapped people. So the fires in New South Wales, a decade ago, I think there was 170 fatalities associated with evacuation. We had something similar in Portugal and Spain a couple of years ago too. So we don't ever want to be in the position where we trap people during evacuation. We want to give people enough notice, err on the side of caution always. But even if we've had a wet spring, it's start people thinking about the possibility that if you live in most parts of BC that are now all fire prone, then you need to think that this is a possibility any year. Like I said, things can turn on a dime as far as changes in the weather and fuels. So you might start thinking about, sort of spring landscaping work. Well, at the same time, it's like, I need to make sure I got my go bag. I need to make sure I know where my meds are and my passports. What am I going to do with my pets? If I've got livestock, where are they going to go? If I own a rental property, how do those people get contacted? There's a lot of bits and pieces to this, and you don't ever want to be doing it in duress.
I think that's the key message for me, that those things need to be thought through in advance. So wearing my private nonprofit society hat, I'm thinking maybe I better check in my community and see if there's readily accessible pamphlets on go bags and this kind of information you're sharing. And if there isn't, maybe I better assure that there is.
Yeah, yeah, and some of the most tragic images from LA were attendants wheeling wheelchaired seniors with surgical masks on and oxygen tanks out of either, home care units or hospitals
Yeah.
in an ember storm. We need to look after the most vulnerable in our societies when it comes to evacuation. And certainly what we've seen in California, and there's some information coming out of Alberta in 2023 where we didn't do a very good job at that. And so, do our assisted living and senior care homes have adequate evacuation plans? What are our hospitals going to do? Our triage centers, if this becomes a reality? Do you have a ambulatory or non-ambulatory neighbor? In the Paradise Fire and the Camp Fire in Paradise, California, a couple of years ago, 85 people died, and most were senior citizens. I think the statistic is 60% of those who succumb in wildfires are seniors who either weren't notified or they're, non-ambulatory or there's some issue there. And so we need to do a much better job of caring for those who are under our care in these highly stressful and highly dangerous conditions.
And I think as you highlighted the last time we did this, Bob, and worth reiterating, it's not just fire, it's smoke.
Yeah.
And once the fire you taught us last time becomes an interface fire, then the level of toxicity
Yeah.
of the smoke, the ambient smoke, multiplies enormously, I understand.
Yeah, yeah. You think about what is in that smoke from those fires in LA or the
Yeah.
fires in West Kelowna. Um, and what's worse is in Altadena, it actually burnt through some light industrial and commercial areas. So, a clothing store, I mean, at a furniture store, I mean, what's in furniture as far as the materials in it. And so a lot of those are, they contain polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and they are highly carcinogenic. So, the more that you're exposed to this, the greater the risk of long-term consequences for not only the firefighters, but also the residents of the area. So, yeah, it's very critical. We need to get them out and away from the smoke as quickly as we can. And in the meantime, make sure we've got N95s and respirators and everything as part of the evacuation.
So it's not just the go bag. In many instances, there should be N95s
At
on
a
it.
minimum.
Yeah. I mean, to do evacuation well and in a way that minimizes the trauma as much as possible, sounds like it does take meticulous planning.
It does. You need to know, you need to game, where is that problem fire going to come from? And then from there, it's where's your egress route, and where can you not egress from is also really important. There's actually a whole science in traffic engineering, and that is focused on, here's the subdivision as part of this community, and it has a road capacity of X. There's X number of vehicles, during the day you're going to come out, X number of vehicles different at night. And, what's the speed at which you can safely, egress this place? Where are they going to go from there? So there's a lot of science that goes into it. And it's so important that communities put the effort into understanding it. I know BCWS, BC Wildfire Service, is spending a lot of time working with local fire departments on that. That's fantastic. I don't know if every community is doing it, but it's not a one and done. You need to do it almost every year. We've got communities in BC that are expanding rapidly, and their new people are moving in. They need to understand where it is they're going to go. They need to think about not just their go bag, but okay, if I have to evacuate, where am I going to go? Is it to a hotel? Is it to family and friends? All those sort of things. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And we just have to start to become more prepared.
You started talking about, well, there's an aftermath, and that was my question. And so, from the point of view of community organizations, how can they be helpful in the aftermath of the fire? What do they need to know, and how can they help?
Yeah, that's an important question. And it's, a lot of it is in the event of a fire that impact the community, it's understanding who's been impacted, what their needs are, the basic necessities are shelter, food, medicine, security, and you've got the apparatus in place to help people, reestablish in the community. Is there long-term shelter? The last thing we want is, after Lytton, there were people, there was a diaspora. I mean,
Yeah.
people who used to live in Lytton who lost their homes. I mean, they were shipped all over the place. And that sense of community is so important to the recovery process and the healing process. Whether it's your church group or your children's volleyball team or the hockey pickup league you were part of, or some other sort of social arrangement, or just your friends,
Yep.
you're when you're taken out of that community and you're stuck in a motel somewhere, and they don't put you up in a Marriott, downtown. They put you up in a motel somewhere, and it is cold, very impersonal, and you've got a family that's struggling, with all of this. So as soon as you can reestablish those connections and those bonds and those multiple levels of compassion and interest, it's so important to the healing process. If you don't have that, then it just extends that hurt, and that isolation so much longer.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for doing this again. Well, good morning from Vancouver, Katie. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to catch up with you. And where I wanted to begin was Golden experienced a near evacuation fire event last summer, if I recall. And I thought it would be interesting for the participants in this webinar to hear a little bit of the story about
Mhm.
how that was for you. And perhaps you could begin by saying, well, how did you become aware that this particular fire and was going to become a threat to the town of Golden?
Yeah, it's a great question. So truly, we had been seeing the smoke and some of the illuminated forest for the week prior to the main event. But truly, what happened was it was a Wednesday evening, and every Wednesday evening we have free music in the park. And so there's families everywhere. They've got their lawn chairs, blankets are out. And we had been having this sort of looming sense for a week and a half prior to that evening. But, it doesn't stop people from going out and enjoying themselves and community and dancing and having a good time. So it was quite smoky and there was a little bit of a haze that evening, but we all were out listening to the live music. And very quickly, I started to notice clusters of people kind of, clustering and coming together with an alarming kind of like look on their faces. And then I had a friend walk up to me and said, "Hey, the fire's moving. The fire jumped the river," which means it moved from the west side of the Columbia River to the east side of the Columbia River. So now there's two sides, which is completely populated by what we call Area A, or Parson, Nicholson, and Haybart, smaller communities, outlier communities of Golden. Myself, my own house is there. And it jumped the river, which means it was only being protected on the west side and there was no protection on the east. And so very quickly, people left. They were, packing up their chairs, packing up their blankets, rushing into their vehicles. and rushing either towards the fire, which is what we were doing to get to back to our home, or going to their own home in the town of Golden and sort of coordinating what the next steps were going to be for them. So that was the night that it all became much more serious and much more of a threat to our community than the weeks prior.
And I think this is such an important point, Katie, that it becomes almost immediately a double threat.
That's right.
It
Yeah.
and probably for many of your staff as well. So it's not like
Yes.
you're sitting back somewhere and you can orchestrate a response without having to think, oh, my home's vulnerable too.
Precisely. Yeah. So really, we have a number of staff that, that evening were at their houses and would have heard the same news that I did, and that were immediately on evacuation alert or order due to it jumping the river. Um, and so, yeah, no, we had no time to determine what level of safety I was going to provide the organization and the people that we served. My primary goal was to get our house evacuated, the sprinklers on the roof, and kind of create a next, like literally similar to a safety plan, like next 2 hours. What are we going to do for the next 2 hours? It was really chaotic.
And Katie, were you getting any official information about the status of the fire? And if so, where were you getting that information from?
Yeah, we were getting official information from the emergency center, so the Emergency Services Center, which is called the ESS. That information was on the Alertable app, which was critical for our evacuation coordination, but also ongoing communication. So everyone very quickly downloaded the app, and we would have updates, sort of like every 10 minutes when it was had first jumped the river. Another place that people were getting a lot of information was social media, because the town of Golden would drop it into the Alertable app, but it would also be on social media. So varying degrees of like avenues of communication, but the communication was clear and very well articulated, and also there was like limited miscommunication. Like it was the same message. It didn't matter which portal it was going to, it was the same sentiment. Yeah.
That's good to hear. And just out of curiosity, do those sources also provide air quality information?
Yes, we do get the Alertable app will pop up or will alert us when there is compromised air quality. But here's the thing, no one was using that Alertable app until we were under threat. So this Alertable app has always existed, and I guess, again, I didn't know. And it has always been used, or it's been used in other areas for this particular size of event, but it wasn't known. So that was very quick. Now everybody has the Alertable app, but prior to the fire, we weren't using it for air quality, for example. But generally speaking, the air quality in Golden generally is so poor due to our sort of geographical disposition, being deep in a valley, and then the mill has a significant amount of emissions. So we tend to have quite poor air quality.
A bit surprising, considering the location, at least as an urbanite, my bias is, oh, you're going to have beautiful air out.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's not, and I think it can be true on some days, but it's not true every day. And it really depends on how socked in or closed in we are with the clouds. For example, the clouds were sucked in this morning and now they've all lifted, and so we would, have better air quality after they move. But yeah, it's a tricky, it's kind of a contradiction.
So, Katie, I'm going to have you put on your ED hat now.
Mhm.
So, you're responsible for this organization. Um, it's a chaotic situation already. Your own home is vulnerable. The
Mhm.
fires jumped across the river.
Mhm.
what were the first three steps that you took as an executive director to respond to this emerging crisis?
As I reflect back, which is hard to do because your memory is kind of blurred in those moments, but I do remember texting our program coordinator um, as I was being evacuated and checking in with her to see if she was going to move. Now, my house was on evacuation alert, but the town of Golden wasn't. So I was messaging or texting her saying, "Are you leaving town? If you're leaving town, where are you going? What are you taking? What are you not taking? And if you're not leaving town, can I get out of town tonight and try to get in touch with you first thing tomorrow morning?" And they decided not to leave town. So I did leave town because our house was at risk.
Yes.
We went a little bit farther than the town of Golden. So when we arrived back into the town of Golden at say, like 7 o'clock, we really didn't get much sleep that night. 7 a.m., I immediately went into the office where other staff members from the community who are living in the town of Golden, those who were on evacuation alert or order stayed at their homes. They didn't even evacuate, I don't think, initially. So the second thing I did was show up at work and we collected everybody's computers and cell phones because they're all backed up and we wanted to ensure that at the very least was at the safest location. So we removed all the computers and all the work cell phones from the actual building itself to a safer space. And then I quickly, very rapidly, with the help of AI, developed a wildfire threat action plan. And I probably did that at 10 a.m. because I had a staff member walk up to me and say, "What are we doing?" And in my head, I thought, I don't know what we're doing.
Right.
But I don't say that out loud. I said, "You're right. Let me get something to you that's more formal and I'll circulate it and I'll try to consult with, we have a smaller team. There's only 11 of us, so I can consult with everyone individually about how they're going to actualize the plan. And that's what we did. Those are my first three things. And what was on that plan was everything from making adaptations to our privacy and storage policy because computers, everything is not allowed in your car or your trailer generally. But when you're living out of your trailer and that's the safest place, I said you are allowed to keep your work computer in your trailer if that's where you're living at this time. If you want us to store it on your behalf, I just had to make real explicit statements that are in contradiction to our policy and procedure manual,
Sure.
but we're in alignment with the crisis that we were undergoing. So I needed to very rapidly, cite the policy and then say, for the next month, you can do the opposite of what I'm saying for you to do. And then I also had email communication that was uniform. So if anyone was emailing us asking for crisis counseling, directing them to the resources, provincial and local resources that were available or regional, very clearly identifying our boundaries of service.
What the situation required of you was to develop a plan on the fly.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
wasn't like you weren't able to say to your staff or even to yourself, okay, this is a fire and smoke emergency.
Yeah,
Here's the
case
plan.
I'm going to pull the plan. No, there's no plan developed in our policy and procedure manual that reflected anything that would have been useful to me.
And I thought it was so innovative of you to think, well, what's AI for? And it provided you with at least a framework or a starting point.
Really, and that's all I needed. I needed a very fast work plan of a frame. I needed a frame with some topics, and then I could flesh and build that out and make adaptations based on what I knew I needed, which was I needed uniformity in our communication. I didn't want communication to slip away from us.
Yeah.
And I also needed staff to know that it was okay, in contradiction to our policies, but I needed the frame built for me.
Sure.
In an effort to save time and to ensure the staff got something immediately so they felt a sense of safety, security. Oh, Katie has a plan. We're going to follow this work plan as best we can. And, hopefully the work plan avoids any dilemmas or those moral or ethical discomforts of like, oh, what should we do? Okay, actually, the plan says X. Like, let's stick with the plan.
The plan asks us to pay attention to this.
Yes,
How are we going to store documents, for example, under these
exactly.
conditions? It's better to have the framework
Exactly.
before rather than have to do it as you go.
Absolutely. Like I'm going to take the plan now to probably our April staff meeting and say, hey, what in the plan worked? Where can we adapt the plan? What did I miss? What did you notice that could have been added? Also letting our occupational health and safety committee review the plan. Because I developed that plan, in consultation with myself. Typically, I would create plans in consultation with the Josh committee or
Yep.
a committee from my board, but so taking some real proactive and preventative steps in these next 4 months as we look to what possibly could be another wildfire threat summer. We've had very little snow and you never know what can happen.
Katie, moving outside your organization to the community,
Mhm.
what community organizations did you find yourself collaborating with as this crisis unfolded, and what did it look like?
Yeah, well, another sort of great resource to me, being rural and remote, has been the BC Federation of Social Services. I rely quite heavily on that organization. I really chew up my membership fee, I feel like, because I don't have a direct line to other organizations who have experienced similar things. So I very quickly reached out to them. They connected me with a number of folks who have experienced this type of threat. So that was great. I also very intimately, indirectly collaborated with the Women's Center in Golden. The Women's Center was feeling, and our earlier center was feeling a great sense of responsibility to serve in that moment,
Yes.
to get all the gas cards, get all the grocery cards, start creating a list of folks who have limited transportation, folks who who have infants, really taking it amongst themselves to build out their plan. And I was kind of holding our plan a bit closer. So in collaborating together, we influence one another a little bit in that, okay, maybe you just control what you can at this time, which is your employees and your location. Maybe next week you look at your most vulnerable families, you reach out to them with toolbox funding or funding of some kind that's like gas card, groceries, diapers. But there was a great desire to jump in and be everything to everyone. So we collaborated, I think, quite well in harnessing that a little bit, but also sharing, just at least sharing with the Emergency Service Center and our local government officials. Hey, we are hearing different stories than you are. We're hearing from the most vulnerable in the community, and here's some stories that we need to share with you so you understand what we're really working with and dealing with. So we actually had a number of elected officials come to a meeting that we held. We held 2 meetings while the wildfire was still of threat. Basically just saying who is who and what is what and where should we direct people and or where shouldn't we, depending on capacity. And since then we've had follow-up meetings also. So we have had seen a continuation of that. And what we found is that there are multiple tables that focus on emergency preparedness and wildfire threat, although the social services have never truly been invited to the tables. And so now we've carved out a place there. So now we are at these conversations, which is great.
Sounds so important to me. Who convened the meetings that you described? Where,
Myself and the executive director of the Women's Center.
oh, okay, so that coalition had enough connection and strength
Yeah.
to convene meetings that eventually also pulled in provincial and municipal actors?
Municipal only, not yet provincial. And so our hope is to get
Okay.
to that table. And we're still connecting with our director of the Columbia Region Shoe Shop District, who is, kind of getting us to that place. But the goal is that we have a spot at that ESS. We have a spot at that emergency center, not to make decisions as it relates to the logistics or the fire, but it's the residual traumatic impacts that we can lend a hand and lend influence in. So that's the goal.
Well, and there will be that residual, we know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've said that very clearly, and we know that that exists just from living in Canada or the world.
Yeah, so I think you may have addressed my next question, but I'm going to
Yeah.
ask it just to be sure. So, this question is this, I've asked you who you collaborated with in terms of
Mhm.
community organization. You've emphasized the Women's Center, and it sounds like you had sort of a pre-existing relationship with them.
We do. Yeah,
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then the next question is, well, of municipal, provincial, federal government, who becomes actors and who do you collaborate with?
Yeah, we have developed, and I have individually, but also collectively, we have strong relationships and partnerships with our municipal government and with our elected officials. So they very often support and will partner on initiatives such as this one. In terms of like provincial, I would lean on the federation for that. Just so I can have when I go to these more local regional
Yep,
meetings or
yep.
municipal meetings, I can draw on the influence of what's happening provincially as it relates to government officials provincially or federally. That's not something that we have access to.
Does the provincial government end up showing up as the community marshals a response? And if so, how do they show up?
That might be a question beyond my scope. Like, I think the provincial government has representatives at the at the Emergency Services Center,
All right.
um, but not like the provincial representative for the Ministry of Children and Family Development. Those ministers aren't showing up. It would be awesome if they did, but ministers specifically around infrastructure, forestry, absolutely, they're connected to the emergency response or center, but we aren't.
I'm wondering about local indigenous communities where, there's not only significant risk, but also significant wisdom about responding to fire and smoke events.
We had the local Métis Nation at our tables. I'm not sure how coordinated or affiliated they are with the ESS. That's again not, I don't know what that looks like. But our Métis Nation, yeah, worked very closely with us around what they're noticing, what they need, what their elders need, what their space needs, and what they foresee their community needing after. And we have actually since, well, the wildfires, but also the Family Center and the Métis Nation have a really great relationship in that we've established a sort of a backpack initiative where we house a number of literal backpacks with everything from blankets to heating, tarps, to grocery cards, to coffee cards, to like matches, everything that the person literally can live out of the backpack. And we have them placed throughout our community. So just another initiative, I guess, or approach to that isolation that we felt during that time, but when people were fleeing their homes to Golden specifically, we had these kind of already made backpacks prepared for folks. And that was in partnership, and the Métis Nation really led that. that initiative.
The other story you told me last time we spoke was it fascinated me. You said, there are people who are can't afford to fill a pickup up with gas to
Mhm.
evacuate in
Yeah.
our community. There's
Yeah.
people who just moved in or people who live at the poverty level or below. And I
Mhm.
thought, I never thought of that.
Yeah, so like it's true. A lot of the folks who are coming to the Women's Center and the earlier center, less so us, but we did have a couple, were saying, hey, like I don't have enough money to put enough gas in to
Yeah,
get because we are so isolated. The next gas station, when you're going east or west, which were the only two ways we could possibly go, 150 kilometers over the Rogers Pass, or 50 kilometers over to Field, which is another significant drive. Now, folks are probably running on $5, $10 a gas booting around town,
yep,
never needing to leave town. And a lot of people don't leave town. Like
yeah,
we are a little landlocked here.
yeah,
So sure, like having money or gas cards available to get people at least $100 worth of a gas tank to get them to the next gas station. Yeah, it was wild, but it's the truth. A lot of folks just moving here because Golden has sort of become a resort municipality for a lot of jobs, for example, with no vehicle and or a husband that takes the vehicle, so leaving the mom and the infant with no vehicle. Well, who's going to pick up the mom and the infant? And where does the bus pick them up? And is there a bus? And is there a car seat in the bus? And if there's no car seat in the bus, is the mom to hold the child? And where are the buses taking these people? And if they're taking them somewhere, is there appropriate transportation for an infant? Like an infant requires a whole other equipment to secure them. So, like, we had a ton of questions that really never got answered, to be fair. But two, it wasn't about answering the questions. It was more to say, I hear your questions. We know that they exist and we are working to either gather that information or to ensure that there's a better plan next time. And so, yeah, these are what the meetings have been since, is how can we be more prepared? And Jasper, like a week before our fire, Jasper burnt down. And everyone in Jasper, well, most people were provided an infographic of here's what to expect. If you're on evacuation alert, this is what to expect, order to expect. And that wasn't clearly provided to us specifically for vulnerable families or single parents with infants. That's the information that was critical for them to just have a sense of relief.
Oh, okay. So you're saying in Jasper that people were provided with
Yeah.
an infographic that addressed
Yeah.
many of these evacuation questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Who in your community would produce and circulate such a document?
Well, I'm not sure. Like, is that the municipal government? Is that ESS? Is that fire prevention and mitigation department, if there is one, which I think there is. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Well, thank you, Arden. Thank you so much. It's been such a gift to get to know you.
So, Allie, if I recall, 2 summers ago, your family was impacted by wildfire and smoke. I wonder if you'd mind of telling a bit of the story of what happened and what you as a family learned from it.
Yeah, so you're right. It was almost 2 years ago. It was the summer of 2023 in August, when my brother and his family, including two young kids or tweens, um, were living in Yellowknife. They've been living there for 20 years, and the city and the province declared a state of emergency, and after a lot of back and forth, decided that there needed to be an evacuation because the way that Yellowknife is situated, there's only one road in and out. So they had to evacuate the whole population before the road was compromised. My sister-in-law and the kids flew out on, I think it was a Tuesday, right before the state of emergency was called or the evacuation order came in, just because the wild smoke was getting really bad. And my brother opted to stay back with their family pet and also with some elderly neighbors and another neighbor who didn't have a car. So he learned that there was going to be an evacuation order call later in the afternoon. So he packed up his dog, he packed up neighbors, packed up some neighbors' bikes into his car, and they all headed south to Edmonton and then Calgary. And when they were driving out, they were driving through fire, through dense smoke, not exactly sure where they were going, just knowing that the first stop was in northern Alberta and that there would be some emergency shelters set up for people in Edmonton and then further down Calgary. So yeah, it was quite harrowing, especially when he told my family that he was staying after the kids and his wife got on the airplane. So that was pretty scary for us. We didn't really want him to stay back any longer, but they got out safely. And then from Calgary, he joined his family in Ottawa, where my parents were, and they were there for about a month before going back. In terms of learnings, well, we learned the importance of preparedness and contingency planning. That was a really big one. Wildfires to Canadians are not anything new, but we do have that feeling that, oh, it's not going to happen to us, it's going to happen somewhere else. And that in the very unlikely case that it would affect us, there would be lots of time to get prepared. However, what Yellowknife showed us was that there isn't always a lot of time to prepare, and that sometimes you just have to be ready to go because wildfires and other emergency events can happen really quickly. So it showed everybody, especially their family, the importance of having emergency preparedness and having these plans in place beforehand and thinking of all these things beforehand. Also, it highlighted the need for importance. Afterward, it was the confusion and the poor communication that left people feeling really insecure and uncertain about where to go and when to go and what to pack. So that is something that I think will have to sort of be figured out, communication, and even communication like within a family, within my brother and his kids and his wife and all these different channels. And then in having those plans, also, I think we all learned the importance of flexibility and the need for flexibility in these plans because things don't always go as you would like them to go.
Conditions change
Yeah.
rapidly under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think also what we've learned as a family is there's an acute emergency. So there's this the time when the evacuation is taking place and everything is moving really quickly, and then there is sort of the tail of the emergency. So the emergency is still going on, but like they weren't in danger anymore physically, but their home, their community, their neighbors may have still been in danger. So knowing that it's a long haul, to prepare for it to be a long thing and to be prepared to feel a lot of feelings, especially like as the parent of kids, knowing that emotions come out in different ways and to honor those emotions is really important too.
Yeah, I'm glad you emphasized that, the aftermath or the tail, as you said, because we tend to think of the emergency as the immediate events that take place. We survive them, and then it's supposed to be over. What you're saying you learned is there's a lot of feelings, a lot of residue left after that that may well need support, at least within the family or possibly the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And And when thinking about the community too, in an area like Yellowknife, community is so important. It's very strong. And the evacuation really underscored the importance of collaboration and the importance of community, um, and the importance to in building community and having strong coordination between local organizations and healthcare, um, before events really helps how the community responds during and after the events too.
So part of the preparation then needs to be not just an organization, uh, and that's the focus of this webinar, but organizations, plural. There needs to be coordination between organizations.
Yeah, and getting to know what other people are doing, what other people's strengths are. Um, so whether you're dealing with an older population or you're dealing with animal welfare, everybody has their different strengths. So when these acute emergencies arise, people know their roles and they know what roles other people can do better. Yeah, and always knowing that like building strong relationships before a disaster makes post-event coordination so much easier as well.
And I think it's also including government, municipal government, provincial government, and knowing what role they're going to play and
Yeah,
having some coordination with them as a part of the preparation.
absolutely. It's so important. And to map out these roles and these strengths beforehand and who's going to speak with who at what time. And um, again, like coming back to communication too, really having those clear lines of communication, and understanding who is doing what. I can't emphasize that enough.
Just inviting you to put on your professional hat for a moment, Ali. How would you describe as the major psychological impacts of an event like this?
So I would say that the trauma and anxiety is probably the biggest psychological impacts and the ones we think of the most. So the wildfires and the smoke that's in the air can often lead to significant trauma, especially if individuals are feeling unsafe already or if they're experiencing displacement. It can be really unnerving. And if you've ever been in a wildfire or dealt with those smoky skies like we do in Vancouver sometimes, it's really disorienting. And it's that paired with the uncertainty of losing one's home, losing their livelihood or access to essential services, it can help exacerbate any anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as creating these new feelings as well. It can be really stressful. The smoke, because it's a really tangible thing you're inhaling, it can create a lot of chronic stress as well. So it's sort of this physical thing. You can feel it in your lungs. Also, displacement and loss, and the potential for displacement and loss can lead to feelings of powerlessness, grief, and then profound loss if that does happen. And then this can be further amplified if you do lose your home, or you have the uncertainty of returning home, or what rebuilding your life would be like after displacement. As we've seen in many different places, when communities are hit by wildfire, it can be a loss of entire communities. And with that come the community ties, the community networks, and the disruption with social networks. And this can further isolate people who are already, isolated to a certain extent.
Unhoused, vulnerable populations are going to
Absolutely,
be
yeah.
further impacted by an event like this.
Yes. So that with that uncertainty too comes the questions about where you're going to live and where will you get your services. Think of kids when the school burns down. They have uncertainty where they're going to go to school. What will their day look like? I think of seniors who access different community programs or food programs. There can be uncertainty about where they're going to access these foods or medications, or unhoused individuals worrying that their services will be the last to be replaced. These sorts of things can be really distressing.
And so, let me ask you this. From the point of view of a community organization, and yes, somewhat ideally, but what kinds of programs and resources would be most helpful to have in place to respond to the psychological issues that are going to arise through an event like this?
Yeah, so the first thing would be to be able to address the needs of people we are with mental health support. So providing immediate access to counseling and psychological first aid. And psychological first aid is it's a course that people can do without having a counseling background or a psychology background. Um, it's a really well thought out and methodical training program to equip ordinary citizens like yourself and I with meeting the needs of people in emergency, and helps to really mitigate the initial shock of disasters, because sometimes it can just seem totally unreal. And then there's also the longer term support programs. So as we know, these aren't things that are going to resolve really quickly. It will take time. So having long-term support programs to address emotional toll of displacement will be necessary. And this is a community-based mental health initiative. So these are things that can take place in community or just be organized by different community organizations if displacement has taken place.
I'm very interested in the psychological first aid that you mentioned, because a number of the organizations that will be attending this webinar aren't going to have the resources to put in place professional counseling on the spot, but they may be able to access and deliver something like psychological first aid. Where is that available?
It's offered by, I believe, Red Cross Canada and some other providers. If you go to the Mental Health and Climate Change Alliance website, we do have resources there that can point you in the right direction.
That was going to be my next question. What is it that your organization, Mental Health Climate Change Alliance, can offer or provide to community organizations who are facing these kinds of events, wildfires, toxic smoke, etc.?
Well, one thing that we're always trying to do with the MHCCA is we're trying to build this community resilience. So we're always working towards fostering collective resilience through community events, peer support groups, local engagement when possible. And this helps people deal with feelings of isolation. But MHCCA as well, we've been developing many different training and resource tools. And so we can offer community organizations access to training programs and also resources on mental health and climate resilience. We can do trainings for climate resiliency groups like climate cafes. So these are peer support groups facilitated by anybody really who's gone through the training. And it really helps people talk about their emotions and talk about climate change and talk about what they've gone through in a really safe space. We're always working with different organizations throughout the province to learn what they're doing and in terms of knowledge sharing. So one of the things that we've done as an organization is to really build out our resource page on our website. And so if you go to our website, you can see what other communities are doing, and then learn from them about what's worked with their community. As we know, there are so many different communities. And when I talk about communities, I don't necessarily mean a physical place, but I mean different groups of people as well. It really does foster collaboration and knowledge between different groups. And then we can also be working with the government partners. At the MHCCA, we work really closely with the Ministry of Health in BC, and we're working with them to figure out what communities need and how can we help develop those resources. So this is an ongoing program, and we do have updates through our website. Another thing that we can do through the MHCCA is we can put you in touch with the experts. If there's a question that we can't answer ourselves, we have a repository of somebody who can definitely answer one of your questions. And we're happy to help you develop a plan. If it's something that you're in need of, we can definitely find the expert and be the liaison to help your organization figure out what they need and how to best prepare.
So, Ali, if an organization wants to learn more, what MHCC has available, in addition to consulting the website, is there someone that they can contact and have a conversation with?
Absolutely. So please do contact us. So you can contact myself or one of our project lead, Kaylee, or another wonderful staff member, Ayush. And you can reach all of us through our website, or sorry, through email at team@mhcca.ca. I'll ensure that Arden has that email address. And we're happy to have a face-to-face conversation or a Zoom conversation about what your organization needs and how we can help to design a program to meet its needs.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. And in conclusion, Ali, let me just ask you this. As you thought about doing this interview with me, is there something that you had in mind that I haven't tapped into with the questions I've asked so far that you think I really want to get that across?
I think the thing I want to emphasize, and I really wanted to talk about, and I've touched on it a bit, is the importance of community resilience building. So, resilient communities before an emergency will do so much better afterwards. So, if you do live in an area where there's a wildfire threat or earthquake threat or something of this nature, getting people together beforehand to talk about it, to map out who has an existing health need that you need to meet. Meet your neighbors. It's a great opportunity to get together. So I know on my street, we're having an earthquake preparedness meeting to understand who has what needs, who has what skills. So in the event of an emergency, we're all a bit more prepared. And aside from being able to react to an emergency, it just makes everybody sleep a little better too, knowing that, okay, someone has my back, because we do know that neighbors will be the first responders in these events.
Wow. So it's at the neighborhood level as well as the community level.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. And
Oh, it was my pleasure.